How? How the corruption that is governance works. Last time we explained that the spirit world, as understood worldwide by indigenous cultures, honors the sanctity of individual conscience. External governance, which is imposed against the will of and is contrary to indigenous culture, both in that initial imposition and innately through its ongoing continuity based upon weaponry and threats against the individuals within its own population, external governance is antithetical to individual conscience. So while portraying themselves to be the most powerful otherwise, governments must pretend to be dunces relative to the worldwide indigenous expertise with the spirit world and its foundation of the sanctity of individual conscience. Because as soon as the worldwide indigenous population is given the spotlight in earnest, the sanctity of individual conscience will come to light. And the sanctity of individual conscience means there's no role for external governance. But much more importantly, metaphysical opportunities encompassed by the spirit realm, opportunities nearly beyond imagination, which can transcend the laws of physics, become accessible. And most of all, there can be free harmonization with our long-lost family in the spirit world. Those with wisdom, love, and compassion vastly beyond ours, visionaries who can help guide a future of the most wonderful harmony and joy. Souls that are simultaneously the most defamed, exploited, and repressed, and yet most selflessly virtuous, spectacularly loving, and luminously wise. They can be finally embraced with the honor and respect that they deserve. And as a united family, each of us with our unique perspectives and capabilities, we can together realistically build the best possible future for everyone. That's the destination, and we're well underway getting there. But to get from here to there, we need a mature understanding of where we currently are. So again, we explained that indigenous cultures honor the sanctity of individual conscience. The opposite of that is dealing with a situation of peer pressure by taking a vote count and then pulling out a gun and forcing all of society to abide by whatever opinion a majority may have, let alone all the in-process corruption encompassed by having majority-elected administrators managing the process in the first place. So let's start at the beginning here. Deciding to subjugate peaceful indigenous cultures because you happen to be willing to hold them at gunpoint does not involve moral authority. And everyone can innately access spirituality through their hearts, their emotions, their experiences, and the natural world all around them. The cat's already out of the bag, the toothpaste is out of the tube. So one of the first orders of business of a hostile social takeover is to try to confuse the matter of spirituality, to take what is universally loving, universally harmonious, universally supportive, universally caring, and contaminate these truths of spirituality with other stuff, contortions, distortions, and false information that favors the newly imposed and arbitrary protection racket. The purpose is to encourage perception of the newly imposed culture as the morally right one, while ironically demonstrating the opposite by encouraging intolerance and exclusion of other cultures. And then, when the state steps away from spirituality in the future, after potentially many centuries of collusion, to act as if the state were never involved at all. Another foundational step is to come up with fancy buildings and titles and flags and songs and so forth to try to institutionalize this hostile takeover, this protection racket, into a brand. If people accept the brand and the state-sponsored spiritual bigotry, then they're well positioned to accept the suppression of every minority in society, upon first mathematically showing through a vote count that peer pressure exists, and then claiming moral authority in holding the entire balance of society hostage to that external opinion. But that's not enough. One lie leads to ever more. So upon entrenching itself, the protection racket decrees that your trade will be taking place with IOUs. You can always turn in your IOU for something that actually exists, until the protection racket then declares your IOUs to be I don't OUs. Pretty neat trick. Now with arbitrary and false moral authority, and arbitrary and false financial authority, any influential media outlet can be compromised, such as in the interest of, quote, national security, to suppress and ostracize spiritual knowledge, If people are going to trust in the lying monetary notes in their hands more than the actual substances of food and water that keep their own bodies alive, what won't they accept? The idea is to make spiritual truth so unpalatable that people's professional reputations are put on the line just for studiously absorbing themselves in the most serious, the most important, the most meaningful of all fields. The concept is to crank that peer pressure as high as it will go, to ostracize anyone who disagrees, steamroll the social danger of individual conscience, individual integrity, individual morality, to demand conformity and view anyone with personal courage as a threat. How dare anyone hold true to their own heart relative to the sacred demands of the weaponized regional protection racket? But wait, there's more. Foster a culture of technological convenience to the extent practical. Electricity, plastics, engines, apps. Yes, these are convenient in the short run, but as one-way, externally supplied critical resources that are under the jurisdictional rules of a protection racket, they can also be taken away, and society needlessly brought to its knees. Now keep in mind that metaphysical spiritual knowledge was in place prior to the protection racket arriving to begin with. This technological bribery is only, quote, solving needs that didn't exist in the first place. And to materialize these non-spiritual technologies, our precious, conscious planet is raped for transient political bribery. Dice her up. Pretender ecosystems and circulation patterns are bound by arbitrary lines that somebody drew on a map. Turn civilization into a slave trade of their home planet, their own mother. Make her unrecognizable beneath the arbitrary lines of maps that don't even exist in reality. We talked about this earlier, this is good. Claim to be both the smartest and most powerful, and yet perpetually completely ignorant and crass about spirituality, about the spirit world, about individual conscience, about the framework of all of reality. In short, maintain the value proposition, hire us, we're stupid. Don't think too much about it, just go with the flow. Go back to counting your IDOTOUs. Play your violent video games out of boredom, maybe you'll get in a fight. Your protection rackets always need some problems to solve. Whereas if there were no protection racket, you could be out in nature, out in peace, out in true reality, ever learning, harmonizing, and growing in love and wisdom. Now, just because you can, tax as much as possible. Don't offer receipts. Don't let anybody know what you're actually doing unless they find out. Oh, covert warmongering? False flag attacks? How did those happen? How could protection rackets do such things? The protection racket has the self-declared moral authority to be true to their own conscience. Everyone else being true to their own conscience, that's a crime. What's the difference? One party has guns and the other has morals, just as it's always been. And then finally, when the corruption finds itself exposed, try to inflame it into a conflict. Somebody will want protection, and the newest protection racket will be clamoring for the job. So obviously, the only sustainable solution to all this nonsense is responsible forgiveness. The antidote to full spectrum dominance is full spectrum forgiveness. To hold ever true to conscience, to not resent those who chose a regrettable stance toward others, and to inspire through example a better path, the only long-range sustainable path of genuine, sustainable, perpetual fairness. Full spectrum forgiveness. And for clarity, what are we forgiving? Corruption. Corruption that's characterized by opacity, misdirection, and reductionism. Opacity, making simple things needlessly difficult to understand. Misdirection, refocusing attention upon solving the wrong problem. And then reductionism, occupying attention with volumes of unproductive details until all sight of the original issue has been lost. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is a complacency reality. Complacency is vastly more the case than malice. There are no secrets to spill, no blackmail risks either way, just tacit self-destruction through the laziness of the masses in refusing to ask and demand satisfying answers to the biggest questions. Just tacit, apathetic, ignorance-based, cowardice-based, complacent self-destruction. Mass complacency, that's the big picture. That's the ideal scenario for the tiny corrupt few. Mass complacency is a much more well-oiled machine of self-destruction than a rampant free-for-all that could unseat those who know what's happening. It's a big problem. It's the defining issue of our time. But more importantly and more accurately, Its resolution represents the defining opportunity of our time, because within it, pretty much every conventional world problem can be solved. So, having established a quick overview of the situation, we'll continue our discussion in the next video.